Earlier this week, Becky was the guest on something called A Touch More. I know this sounds like a show that's exclusive to OnlyFans, but A Touch More is a podcast hosted by the Sue Bird and the inspiration of prepubescent boys, Meg Rapinoe. They were talking to Rebecca Lobo about the unreasonable demands made by WNBA players.
Rebecca Lobo just dropped a truth bomb that should have every WNBA player sweating bullets. This ESPN analyst and original 1997 WNBA legend basically torched current players during their own CBA negotiations. But here's what makes this absolutely brutal. She didn't say this on some random sports show. She went straight to Sue Bird and Megan Rapinoe's podcast, looked WNBA royalty in the eye, and told them the players are completely botching this whole thing. So what did these athletes actually do that was so bad it made a league pioneer turn against them?
She criticized WNBA players for their inability of maintaining support from the fan base. You had the fans' support. All you had to do was shut the hell up. Instead, you displayed your unbelievable entitlement by calling million-dollar annual salaries a slap in the face. When I played in this dump, we were playing for prizes, free scooters, tricycles, just for men, and you have the audacity to complain about receiving $1 million you haven't earned?
Look at this moment again. Rebecca Lobo is straight up calling out today's WNBA stars for how they're handling these contract talks. Her message is crystal clear. You had people actually caring about you for once, and all you needed to do was keep your complaints to yourself. But no, they went ahead and showed what she's calling absolutely shocking entitlement by trashing million-dollar contract offers as insulting. Remember, this woman competed for literal prizes and free scooters back in the late 90s. But her harsh words point to something way more significant than just being annoyed about salary whining. What we're seeing is a massive power shift happening between the league and its athletes right now.
I'm in the business of orchestrated combat. It was a seminal moment for a number of reasons. This contract, it shaped the future of the business, but it also changed the mindset. It changed the mentality of Vince McMahon. With Bret Hart, it was one of the first times that a star talent had more leverage than the company. It was the first time that Vince McMahon felt powerless in negotiations. He made a promise to himself to never be put in that situation again. He would never allow one of the employees to have more power than he.
So that wrestling reference actually makes perfect sense here. Back in the late 90s, Vince McMahon handed Bret Hart this enormous WWF deal worth serious money. Nobody had seen contract numbers like that before, but what really mattered was this. For the first time ever, a performer had gained more control than the company paying him. McMahon walked away from those talks feeling completely helpless, and he promised himself something that day. No employee would ever hold more influence than the brand again. No single performer would ever become more important than the WWF itself. Right now, Kathy Engelbert is living through that identical experience for the first time in WNBA history. These players actually think they're running the show. They're convinced that Caitlin Clark's ratings explosion and new leagues like Unrivaled have given them serious bargaining power. Whether they're right or wrong doesn't matter. They believe it, and just like Vince McMahon back in 1997, Kathy Engelbert is already planning her moves to make sure this situation never repeats itself.
Headline at Sports Media Watch. WNBA pushing earlier start and later finish to the pretend basketball season. When I initially saw this headline the other day, I was confused. Correct me if I'm wrong here. I don't remember anyone asking for more pretend basketball. I don't remember seeing this insatiable demand, this unquenchable desire for more women's basketball. Matter of fact, if you look at ratings and attendance for Unrivaled, or the fact that absolutely no one is talking about women's college basketball, or the fact that the WNBA Finals struggled to sell tickets with tickets going for less than $40.
Check out this power move. the WNBA is pushing to stretch the regular season from 44 games all the way to 54 games. That's 10 extra games they want added. Training camp would kick off in March, and the WNBA Finals wouldn't wrap up until November. At first glance, you'd think the league is just trying to boost their revenue streams. More games means more ticket money, more TV opportunities, more sponsorship deals flowing in. But take a closer look at what this schedule actually does. This proposal isn't really about generating cash flow. Here's the real strategy. If this schedule change happens, WNBA players would go straight from the unrivaled season into WNBA training camp with absolutely zero downtime. They'd be competing 12 months a year with no opportunity to play overseas. The league already has these prioritization rules that financially punish players who skip training camp to compete in other leagues. What this new timeline creates is a brutal ultimatum for every player. Either you commit to our league completely, or you go chase these other opportunities overseas in an unrivaled, but doing both becomes literally impossible.
From 44 games to a maximum of 54 games. This would give WNBA players 10 more opportunities to prove they can't sell tickets. But I don't think this is about money. Or in the case of the WNBA, I don't think this is about increasing the amount of the money that they are losing. This schedule is about power. It's about control, leverage. The league wants training camp to start in March with the WNBA Finals, also known as the Chase for the Platinum Pooper, concluding in November.
This is absolutely genius strategy from Kathy Engelbert. She's not even pretending to negotiate anymore. She's giving players a reality check about who actually controls this situation. For years now, WNBA players have been living in linked fantasy land. They've somehow convinced themselves they're on the same level as NBA stars. They honestly believe their individual brands are more valuable than the league that employs them. These employees think they have more leverage than their actual employer, but reality is about to hit hard. WNBA players are basically entry-level employees in the sports world. They're a nice bonus feature, not an essential business component. Entry-level workers get brought on when companies are doing well and want to help their main moneymakers look good. But when budgets need cutting, entry-level positions disappear first. Not because management wants to be mean, but because the business can absolutely function without them.
Now, of course, Unrivaled is already doing a phenomenal job of putting themselves out of business. But with this new schedule, overpaid players in Unrivaled, they would have no break between the Unrivaled season and the WNBA season. This proposal, it essentially forces WNBA players into making a choice. Due to prioritization, the WNBA penalizes players who don't show up to training camp because they're competing in another league.
Seriously, imagine what would actually happen if WNBA players decided to strike tomorrow. Fans wouldn't lose sleep over it, because WNBA fans barely existed before the Caitlin Clark explosion. NBA owners definitely wouldn't panic because this league has been costing them money for decades straight. They'd actually save cash if players walked away. That's not having leverage. That's the complete opposite of leverage. Now think about the NBA for comparison. If NBA players even threatened to walk out, the entire league would go into full crisis mode. Billions of dollars would vanish instantly. Television partners would be demanding their money back. Sponsors would be running for the exits. NBA owners would hand over almost anything players wanted to prevent that financial disaster. But with the WNBA, a strike would basically just give everyone an extended holiday.
The employees think they are more powerful than the employer, when the reality is WNBA players are the equivalent of entry-level employees. Entry-level workers, they're a bonus. Entry-level workers are hired when the company is thriving to assist those who are actually generating the revenue. But when times get tough, when management slashes the budget, the entry-level workers, they are the first to be fired.
What makes this whole thing fascinating is how convinced these players are that they actually hold power right now. Attendance jumped from practically nothing to slightly more than practically nothing, and somehow they see that as a mandate from the fans. Ratings shot up because one specific player, Caitlin Clark, became this massive cultural moment, and suddenly everyone thinks they deserve NBA-level paychecks. Unrivaled and overseas leagues are throwing around contracts, so players figure they've got options now. But all of that is just smoke and mirrors. None of it actually translates into real negotiating strength when your employer is literally subsidizing your entire career.
Like I have told you guys from the beginning, this leverage that WNBA players think they have, this leverage is an illusion. The increased ratings, attendance going from nothing to almost nothing, secondary dumps like Unrivaled and Project B. This gave WNBA players the illusion of leverage. If you took this same situation and you applied it to the NBA, the league would be in trouble. NBA players would get whatever the hell they wanted, but with the WNBA, the same leverage does not apply because this league isn't a necessity. It's a bonus. It's a nice tax write-off for the NBA. But if it goes away, they'll just find another way to ease their tax burden. The way it looks right now, if WNBA players want their $1 million annual contracts, if they want to be paid what they deserve, they're going to have to make some concessions. And the main concession seems to be Unrivaled going out of business.
Here's what this new schedule proposal actually achieves. If WNBA players want those $1 million deals, the same salaries they're calling insulting despite not bringing in enough revenue to justify them, they're going to have to give up something major in return. And that something is simple. Unrivaled dies. Think about how Unrivaled actually makes money. It's a 3-on-3 league that operates during WNBA offseason, from January through March. They're paying players 6-figure salaries for just 8 weeks of basketball. Their entire business concept relies on having access to WNBA talent during those winter months, when players would normally be competing overseas. But if the WNBA season now runs March through November, Unrivaled completely loses their player pool. Athletes can't play in both leagues anymore without breaking prioritization rules and forfeiting WNBA money. Nafissa Collier and Brianna Stewart created Unrivaled specifically to give players a domestic alternative during the offseason. They raised millions in startup funding, they locked in broadcast partnerships. They convinced 30 players to invest in their vision, and now the WNBA is about to make their entire business impossible. This isn't some accident. Kathy Engelbert is systematically destroying every alternative option that could give players any bargaining power in future negotiations. Rebecca Lobo's podcast comments show exactly how the veteran players see this mess. She competed when salaries were embarrassingly tiny. She played for actual prizes instead of real paychecks. From where she sits, current players are acting spoiled by complaining about $1 million offers. But what's really going down here isn't about being grateful or acting entitled. This is purely about control. It's about whether employees can force their demands on their employer. And the answer is becoming pretty obvious. The WNBA isn't some essential business. It's a tax write-off for NBA ownership. It's a nice gesture toward gender equality in sports. It's how NBA owners show they care about social responsibility. But if it vanished tomorrow, the NBA would just find some other charitable cause to fund instead. Players can't say the same thing. Without the WNBA, most of these athletes have nowhere left to turn. Overseas leagues don't pay enough to build sustainable careers. Unrivaled can't survive without the WNBA's off-season window. No other domestic professional options exist. So, when players start threatening to reject the CBA or demanding 50% revenue sharing, like NBA players receive, they're bargaining from complete weakness. They're pretending to have leverage that simply doesn't exist. The league knows this perfectly, which is why this schedule proposal isn't actually a proposal. It's an ultimatum. Follow our rules, take our terms, and stop pretending you have other choices. Because we're about to eliminate those choices completely. That Vince McMahon and Bret Hart comparison keeps making sense because it's so accurate. McMahon discovered in 1997 that letting talent become more powerful than the brand creates a business model that can't work long-term. He spent the next 25 years making sure no wrestler could ever hold that kind of control again. He built WWE's brand to be more important than any individual performer. When stars jumped to competing companies, WWE kept going strong, because the company was the attraction, not the individual talent. Kathy Engelbert is using that exact same strategy right now. She's ensuring the WNBA brand, weak as it might be, stays more valuable than any single player. Even Caitlin Clark, who created 90% of the league's attention boost this season, doesn't have enough influence to make demands. Because if Clark disappeared tomorrow, the WNBA would keep existing. It would go back empty arenas and tiny TV audiences, but it would survive. The NBA would continue funding it for public relations reasons. The league would keep operating at a loss like it has for 27 years. That's the truth. WNBA players refused to face. They experienced one season of better ratings and packed arenas, and decided everything had permanently changed. They thought they finally had real power. They believed this was their chance to demand NBA-level treatment. But they completely misunderstood what was happening. The ratings boost came almost entirely from one player. The attendance increases were focused around games featuring that same player. The rest of the league stayed mostly invisible to regular sports fans. Now the consequences are arriving. Players demanded maximum salaries over $1 million. They called anything less insulting. They compared themselves to NBA players despite generating a tiny fraction of the revenue. They acted like they deserved money they hadn't actually earned. And by doing that, they gave Kathy Engelbert all the weapons she needed to remind them of their actual place. This new schedule proposal will probably get approved. Players will complain about it publicly. Some might threaten to sit out or play overseas full-time. But in the end, they'll accept it because they don't have any real alternatives. Unrivaled will either shut down or completely change their business model. Overseas leagues will keep paying modest salaries to American players who can't crack WNBA rosters. The power balance will return to where it's always been, with the league controlling everything and players feeling lucky to have jobs. Rebecca Lobo's podcast, Criticism, was the old guard firing a warning shot. She was telling current players they're screwing this up badly. They had public support, or at least public indifference, which was close enough. All they needed to do was accept reasonable salary bumps and stop complaining publicly. Instead, they whined about million-dollar offers. They acted like victims despite being subsidized by a more successful league. They burned whatever goodwill they might have earned. So where does this end up? The WNBA will expand its schedule. Players will choose between year-round domestic basketball or continuing to earn supplemental income overseas. Unrivaled will probably collapse within 2 years. The next CBA negotiation will happen with players having even less bargaining power than they have right now. Because that's what happens when you overplay a weak hand. You don't just lose the current fight, you lose credibility for every future fight too. The real tragedy isn't that WNBA players won't get NBA money. That was never realistic anyway because they don't generate NBA revenue. The tragedy is they had a chance to make real progress, better travel conditions, improved healthcare, modest salary increases, bigger rosters. But they got greedy. They wanted everything immediately. Now they're going to end up with less than they could have gotten if they'd just been patient and smart about it. Kathy Engelbert studied Vince McMahon's playbook. Never let talent become more powerful than the brand. Never allow employees to dictate terms to the employer. Never negotiate from weakness. The WNBA followed those rules perfectly. The players didn't. That's why this negotiation is going to end exactly like Rebecca Lobo predicted, with players losing support they barely had to begin with, accepting terms they hate, and learning a very expensive lesson about the difference between thinking you have power and actually having it.